So as we always do, we do some meditation, some breathing meditation, and of course set the motivation. And I want to do something slightly different this time with the prayers that I usually do, but it's nice to introduce it slowly. So I want to take a break between each repetition. So I say I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sanghas, the taking refuge in Bodhicitta prayer. After the first repetition, think about the words a little bit. Second, third. Then for the four measurables, since we only recite it once, each line I recite it once, take a break. Right? Again, the next line, so it gives you enough time to reflect on it, so that if you choose at some point to do these prayers more regularly, you used to, if you've done it once or twice, or say for the remainder of this course, then it's so much easier to reflect on it as you recite it, because you've got some familiarity. Okay, all right, so just that you don't wonder while I take a break. Let's stop reciting. Okay. So just try to stay in the present. Let go of any thoughts of the past and the future. And calmly observe your breath. And once again, you're on Mass Vultures Mountain, overlooking the hills of Rajgriha. The sky is blue. A cool breeze is blowing. And seated in the front of that plateau, on that mountain, is the Buddha. And just seeing him reduces all your worries, your fears. It makes you feel calm and relaxed. While inspiring you to become just like him. And the Buddha is surrounded by the Sangha. by his disciples who purely practice what he teaches. And then to remind us why we're studying the Heart Sutra. Think that around you, the Buddha and the Sangha are all sentient beings. With those we dislike or who dislike us right in front of us. And by remembering that the most meaningful life we can live is if we dedicate it towards all sentient beings, let's first generate sincere affection. Also described as affectionate love. Feeling equally close towards all sentient beings. Based on the understanding that all their faults, all their limitations are not in the nature of their mind and can be removed. And then focusing specifically on these faults, these limitations, and their resulting sufferings. Let's wish from the depth of our heart that they may be free from all those. And that we ourselves may be able to protect them from all these faults, limitations, and their resulting sufferings. And then allow for that great compassion, as it's called, to grow stronger. To turn into the altruistic attitude that is based on great confidence, determination, and courage. Thinking I will do whatever it takes to help sentient beings overcome all their flaws, all that which obstructs their minds, and of course all the suffering they experience. I'll take personal responsibility to remove all those, that is, to help them to liberate themselves from all those. Which is why I want to become a fully enlightened Buddha. So now generate the aspiration or even determination to become fully enlightened. Based on your great compassion and the altruistic attitude. And think that it's also with that mind, with that motivation, that we'll continue to study, contemplate and meditate on the Heart Sutra. And to be well prepared to do so effectively, let's now, without losing the visualization of the Buddha and the Sangha, and without losing the mind of enlightenment, recite the prayers. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Well done, you figured it out really quickly. One deep breath and you knew it continues. Okay, great. All right. Well, some of you have heard already, but just for those who weren't here, last night I was thinking of the discussion groups, and I thought the way we usually study is that we always get together with new people. So I thought it'd be best to just rearrange the discussion group every day. Just have new people come together, so every time you learn something from different members of these groups. So just now, Droga and I, we thought to do this in the following way. We ring the bell a little earlier, which would mean 10 minutes to 2. You all come together here. There'll be a bowl with a number, right? 1 to 5. You got your number. And you're told where all the groups will always be in the same place. The first group, the second, the third, and so forth, all the way through to group number 5. And you just need to go to your group. Put the piece of paper back in the bowls for you to be able to take another one tomorrow. So in that way, every time you're here a little earlier, to make sure the discussion time remains the same, but every time you're in a different group, you're with different people, it's always a different discussion. And in that way, I think you learn more. Shall we try that? Let's try that. See how it works. And of course, I'm open to any kind of change, any kind of suggestion, because every group is different, and so adjustments are important. All right, let's try that. Okay, great.
Impermanence is permanent.
Pardon?
Impermanence is permanent, like changing the groups.
The impermanence is permanent. This is actually interesting because there is really that. Impermanence remains the same. So sometimes it is, the impermanence is permanent. Though permanent sometimes, as I said, doesn't necessarily refer to the constant change, but rather that it remains the same for some time, right? I mean, it is something, the change happens every day. So actually that statement is made. Impermanence is permanent. Sometimes you hear it said, but actually, of course, even impermanence is impermanent because it changes all the time. Anyway, don't mean to confuse you. All right, going back to the what I called 4 profundities, right? Okay. Now, but before we go into this, I'd like to read to you some verses by Lama Tsongkhapa from his 3 principal aspects of the path. It's a short text. It's only 14 verses. It teaches the Lam Rim. You ask about the Lam Rim, right? The Lam Rim is actually a genre of teachings that were introduced by the great Indian master, Nalanda master, Atisha, who came to Tibet around the 11th, 12th century. And he introduced these steps, different contemplations, meditations, starting with the topic of appreciating our human rebirth, or remembering that we have this precious opportunity, being a human, and not just that, being born into certain circumstances, etc. And then from there, remembering our own death, and the different steps of motivation that take you all the way up to wisdom. So to prepare your mind until eventually, you generate bodhicitta. There's this topic of bodhicitta, how to meditate on it, how to develop it. And then comes wisdom. And once you're at wisdom, which is so difficult, then you need the 4 schools, for instance, to get a better understanding of emptiness, right? So to answer your question, which I never did, but a Lamrim text is kind of making your mind more flexible, moving on, until you get to the stage of wisdom. Okay? So the differentiation between the schools is mainly from the point of view of wisdom. Also the path, the different levels of the path of accumulation, they're also mainly from the point of view of wisdom. Yeah? And it's not that you cannot practice the whole Lamrim once you come to wisdom, when your focus is mainly on wisdom. I mean, you continuously go through these topics, go through them again. You may not even follow that order. If you have a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for this human life, but you keep forgetting death, you may skip the first topic and focus more on the second, and so forth. So you're probably, most of you, familiar with the Lamrim. Beautiful practice. It was geared for the Tibetans. It was basically, well, it was psychologically very appropriate for the Tibetans, but I think it actually works for us in a similar way. I mean, we may have to make some adjustments about some of the examples that are given, but other than that, yeah, it's a beautiful practice. However, some of the divisions, as I just said, they're more specifically directed at wisdom. Okay, great. But anyway, what does Lama Tsongkhapa say in his short Lamrim text? As I said, it's got only 14 verses. So I just want to address the wisdom aspect, because he very beautifully talks about the fact that just not finding something, so meditating on, for instance, the body or the self, not finding the self, not finding the body, that in itself is, first of all, not that difficult, and secondly, not enough. To fully realize emptiness, we need to understand that there's no contradiction between appearances, which is another way of saying the dependent arising of phenomena appearing to the mind since they're dependently arisen, versus not being findable when engaging in ultimate analysis. When we don't analyze, there's this difference. When we don't analyze, phenomena appear because they're dependently arisen. When we analyze, they disappear because they don't exist inherently. Do you understand these 2 levels? So the conventional truth is the truth that is existent. It's an existent category of phenomena, the conventional, because at the time when our mind doesn't analyze, when our mind has all these different appearances arising in the mind, since phenomena are dependently arisen, then we talk about the conventional truth. Whereas if we start analyzing these appearances and start investigating on a different level, then we perceive their lack of inherent existence, their ultimate truth, their ultimate reality. And those are 2 planes of existence which are not only non-contradictory, they actually support each other. So not only do they not contradict each other, but they support each other. The fact that phenomena lack inherent existence enables phenomena to be dependently arisen. And because they're dependently arisen, they lack inherent existence. Right? One cannot be without the other. And we need to understand the ultimate nature of reality in combination with dependent arising. Seeing no contradiction, and on top of that, seeing that they support each other, that they're of one nature, that you can't separate them. that it's looking, that they're actually referring to looking at the same thing from different angles, right? So you can look at, for instance, the table from the point of view of being a conventional truth, being dependent on causes and conditions, performing a certain function, appearing to the mind. And from another perspective, when you analyze, when you engage in ultimate analysis, not just ordinary analysis, but what is called ultimate analysis, that the table cannot be found as within its parts, as being its parts, as separate from its parts, as beyond, as existing beyond its parts, and so forth. All right. Now, anyway, what's most important of what I just said is that emptiness and dependent arising need to be seen in combination. And this is expressed by Lama and Tsongkhapa with the following words. As long as the two understandings of appearance, which is the infallibility of dependent arising, or which is the unfailing dependent arising, and emptiness, which is beyond assertions, beyond ordinary assertions, it's beyond that, appear as separate, we will not realize the intent of the sage or the intent of the Buddha. Okay? As long as the two understandings, so appearance, that is dependent arising on one hand, so unfailing or infallible dependent arising in the sense that everything arises in dependence. So it's consistent, it's unfailing, it's infallible. So as long as the two understandings of appearance, which is dependent arising, and emptiness appear separate, we will not realize the intent of the Buddha. We see them as separate. Yet, when these two realizations arise, not in alternating, but together. It's not like, oh, one day it's just dependent arising, but emptiness is out. On another day, dependent arising makes a lot of sense, but, emptiness makes a lot of sense, but dependent arising doesn't, and vice versa. So as long as that is happening, as long as they're alternating, but not taken to mind together, from merely seeing the infallibility, yet when these two realizations arise, not in alternation but together, so when we're able to see them together, from merely seeing the infallibility of dependent arising, the entire object of grasping at certainty is dismantled. So by merely seeing dependent arising right away, phenomena don't exist inherently. And you can also see it from another perspective. As the moment we see the lack of inherent existence, the moment we think about it, of course they exist in dependence. So in that way, you don't fall into either of the extremes. Right? You're totally aware, on one hand, phenomena lack inherent existence, so you don't fall into the extreme of reification, of solidifying, concretizing, seeing phenomena as totally concrete and independently existent. So you don't fall in that extreme. But at the same time, you also don't fall into the extreme of nihilism because you have a sense, well, of course they exist in dependence on other phenomena. So you don't see them as separate existences. Both of them make total sense and they come together in your mind. You don't see them as separate. That's really important. And that is expressed also by the third profundity. What is the third profundity? Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Okay. Form is not other than emptiness. Cannot be taken literally. It's not literally saying that form is emptiness. Form is not emptiness. Here, the body, being a conventional truth, it's not its ultimate truth. But you can't separate them. It's like, as I just said, that it's like looking at the same thing, but just from a different vantage point, from a different perspective, right? From a different angle, if you like. So you look at the table from the point of view of having arisen in dependence on causes and conditions, having parts that are not itself, and being merely designated. That's one way in which we can say, or based on which we can say, the table exists as a conventional truth. Yet, although it exists, it doesn't exist inherently, or because it exists in dependence on all these factors, on all these phenomena, therefore cannot be found as existing in and of itself, as being findable somewhere as existing inherently. Like when we look for it, we're actually not looking for the conventionally existent table, we're looking for one that exists beyond its parts, that exists independent of causes and conditions, independent of designation. To us, of course, it seems initially as if we were looking for the conventionally existent table, right? Because for us, the inherently and conventionally, table and inherently existent table, there's no difference to our mind. Because it always appears, the table, whenever it appears as inherently existent. Sometimes I'm reminded of the following example. I've once heard that, this is in the past, I don't think it exists now, but there was in some place there was a factory and it smelled disgusting. It had this gross smell. It was really gross. And so the people who lived there, they never noticed that it smelled bad because they didn't know anything else. And then someone would come there and say, wow, it smells disgusting. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? They didn't know it any other way. So that reminds me here of the situation we're in right now. We don't know it any other way. Someone talks about inherent existence and we're like, what inherent? What smell? Yeah, so we meet a Buddha, for instance, or we meet an Arhat, someone who's attained liberation, and this person tells us, yeah, phenomena don't exist that way. And you're like, what are you talking about? Object of negation? It's like the smell. What smell? What smell is extra? You know, while you live near that factory, you can still smell roses and tea and coffee. You still have a perception of smell, but it's always mixed. The smell of roses or flowers and so forth, all that is mixed with the smell of the factory. And so you can distinguish between the different smells, but you're just not aware what the person is talking about when they say, well, what about the disgusting smell? What? Yeah. And so that's what's so difficult. It's kind of like someone telling us, can you smell it? Like, no sensory perception of that. So we have no sensory experience of inherent existence. Anyway, that would be impossible because neither inherent existence nor non-inherent existence can be known by our sense consciousnesses, right? By our ordinary sense consciousness. I'm not talking about Buddha's sense consciousness, but that's way beyond our sense consciousnesses anyway. So now our ordinary sense consciousnesses, inherent existence appears to it, but we're not aware of that. And we're certainly not aware of the lack of inherent existence. And that also makes it really difficult because we're so used to sense perceptions. Our whole life, we revolve around them. Look at the modern lives. The stuff that is sold in stores, for instance. It's all sense objects. All sense objects. Beautiful shapes, colors, smells, sounds, tastes, and tangible objects in the form of clothes, fabrics and so forth. And what do we do most of the time when we got some time off? We go shopping, right? Buy drinks and food and more clothes, right? And fragrant candles and incense and so forth. So our whole life revolves around sense objects. Therefore, emptiness is the last thing on our mind because it doesn't even appear to our sense consciousnesses. And even the opposite, inherent existence, since it appears all the time, we totally believe in it. We're not even aware that it appears. Forget about being aware that it's mistaken. We don't even know it appears. That's reality. That's it. That's why the first step is so difficult, to take that first step. What are they talking about? Inherent existence. And what, of course, is also quite difficult is the word inherent existence means something specific in English, right? You don't use it that way, but you say inherently. Water is inherently wet. We talk like that, so it seems to make total sense. And even in a Buddhist context, if you don't talk about emptiness, the word in Tibetan, like the word is rangxin gituba, rangxin. Rangxin means nature. You use it all the time. Oh, it's its nature to get angry, right? Yeah, say a lot. So, therefore, the word in an ordinary context has a certain meaning. It's used. It's not an object of negation. But then, in a particular context, it is defined in a very specific way, which means it's the nature of this object, and therefore it doesn't depend on anything else, right? As we had in this handout I gave to you, we have a little bit left in that handout, but I spoke about it initially. We use the word independent as well. The United States is an independent country, but it's only in relation to specific aspects, specific features or specific functions of, for instance, the American government, that we say it's independent. It's not totally independent. That'd be ludicrous. You wouldn't have any global warming in the US if it was totally independent, right? Okay. So, having said all that, we're slowly moving in that direction. Despite all our minds telling us phenomena exist inherently, what do you say, right? But we're slowly moving in that direction. And it's helpful to negate that movement of negating, because every time our mind perceives something in an affirmative way, we reify. We see it as more concrete than it is. Therefore, I'm stressing this, and we're not happy with that. I remember I once listened to some interview, and the guy, I don't even know what it was all about, but the guy said, you can't know a negative. And I was like, I have no idea, right? This person was like, you can't know a negative. And the interview was like, yeah, of course, right? So we even have a sense that you can't know a negative. But of course we can know a negative. If I ask you, is there a monkey on my table? And you say no, it's because you know that there's an absence of monkey on my table. It's as clear as that. But we have a sense, we just know the table. Yeah, we know the table. But we also know that implied by knowing the table, we know, well, if we focus on it, if we don't focus on it, we just we see the table, we explicitly know the table, and implicitly know there's no monkey. But if we pay attention to it, we know the absence of monkey on the table. We explicitly know that. We explicitly use the word, explicitly know that. So we know negatives all the time, right? Yes. Okay. Oh, you know, I'm not rested. Are you rested? No, I feel not rested. I mean, that's a negative. I feel not rested. Right? Yeah. Anyway, so there are a lot of examples, of course. For instance, she's in remission of cancer, right? Someone is in remission. It's saying right now there is no cancerous growth. It looks like that. So again, there are negatives we can know. Therefore, our mind is able to know negative phenomena. But because of its reifying tendencies, we prefer non-negative phenomena. We prefer to think in an affirmative way, in a way in which we see positive, not in like good or bad, but positive as in like reifying or no, affirming something, right? Does that make sense? Great. So, therefore, we're introduced to emptiness first. It's difficult, doesn't make sense at first, but we're slowly digging our way through these different words and ideas, and slowly it becomes a little clearer. However, our tendency then, being to fall into the extreme of nihilism, I mean, don't worry about it. I don't think you ever really fall into the extreme of nihilism. I mean, it's not like you're going to stop eating and drinking. in your thoughts, while you think of it, there's a sense, oh, there's no self at all. But the next time someone insults you, it'll be back. Don't worry. Okay. So it's not really, I mean, there's this discussion like how far can you actually, there's only one danger, or one great danger. We don't have the tendency to believe in karma anyway. We kind of feel if just no one knows, I can get away with something, right? Of course, if I get caught stealing and whatever, then I'd be in trouble. So there are consequences to my actions, but if I'm skillful about it, no one will notice. However, karma, of course, is a different aspect. I mean, that's something we don't really take into consideration, that every action has a consequence. What goes around comes around kind of idea. Which is why, well, not really being so much part of our life, then when we think of emptiness, there's a tendency, oh, there's no inherent actions, no inherent consequences. So my actions, I mean, they won't have consequences, right? I can behave the way I want. I mean, I remember there was a time, or it's still an issue of abuse. Abuse happens even in Buddhist circles. We can't make the teachings responsible for that. We can make the people not practicing properly responsible for that, or even using the teachings to their own advantage. It does happen. And then sometimes the response is, but it's all empty. Right? It's all empty. Why do we care about abuse? Huh? That is denying dependent arising. It lacks inherent existence, but it exists. It exists. And therefore we need to do something about it. For the perpetrator, for their benefit as well. I mean, they're harming themselves greatly. What are they going to experience in the future if they abuse others? And of course for the victims, even more importantly, of course, actually in that moment, more importantly, but the most severe suffering is actually the future suffering of that person. They're just not aware of it. So we need to do something. That is ludicrous. This is saying it doesn't exist. Okay. Therefore, the danger of first reflecting on emptiness is not so much that you think everything is gone, you don't need to eat and drink anymore. You'll still be eating and drinking and enjoying your fruit. But the sense my actions won't have consequences, that you start to deny the law of karma. It's just a law of nature, right? It's just a law of nature. It's part of the law of cause and effect. They're laws of nature, right? The law of what?
What you sow.
Pardon?
What you sow, so shall you reap.
Yeah, what you should. Okay, that's the Christian version, or Judeo-Christian, right? That's also in the Torah, isn't it? What you saw is, yeah. So therefore, that's how it's expressed, but exactly that. So the law of karma, the law of gravity, for instance. So sometimes people say, "Oh, it's just not fair." It's like saying gravity's not fair. I drop my favorite cup and it breaks. That's not fair. Sorry, it's no one who's kind of saying, oh, that person, their cup is going to break a little bit more because I don't like them. So, I'm not that fair. My gravity, I'm going to show it to... It's just the law of nature. And we learn how to live within that law, in this natural law. So the law of cause and effect, everything that is impermanent is dependent on not just one cause, but many causes and conditions, right? And it gives rise to many different results. That's just, any farmer knows that, any gardener knows that. And then within that law of cause and effect, there's the law of karma, which is basically just saying if there are volitional mental actions, there are mental experiences as a result of that. And just as you don't get a peach tree from an apple seed, you don't get an experience of happiness as a karmic result of a harmful action. Of course, you may rob a bank and feel really happy afterwards, but that feeling of happiness is not the karmic result of robbing the bank. It's the karmic result from some other action. So result of an action is not necessarily, the result of a karmic action is not necessarily a karmic result. Very important. the result of a karmic action is not necessarily the karmic result of that action. Yes, if I rob the bank and I feel really happy with all this money now, that is not the karmic result of robbing the bank. Okay? Similarly, something that is the cause of a karmic result is not necessarily the karmic cause of that. For instance, if I try to be really compassionate and I help this elderly woman over the street and I get hit up by a truck as a result of that, it's not like I help this elderly woman, that's the, oh my God, don't help elderly woman over the street, the karmic result is being hit by a truck. No, the cause for that karma to ripen, it's one of the causes. I'm not saying the main cause, it's one of the causes to ripen is that you cross the road, a busy road that you wouldn't have crossed otherwise, but you did anyway because you wanted to help that elderly person. So therefore you're taking her across and you get, maybe you didn't pay so much attention, you paid more attention to her that she doesn't drop her bags and whatever, or you were carrying them. So really it's a positive scenario and still you get hit by a truck. But that is just a cause or a condition more so, like a secondary cause that is also responsible for the ripening of that karma. But it's not the karmic cause. It's just a cause. Does that make sense? And if you hadn't created, if you never had created that kind of karma, and of course we don't know whether we have or not, but let's say you haven't, you could just sleep on the road and you wouldn't be hit by a truck. Right? And then sometimes it happens. People put themselves in the most dangerous situations. And nothing happens. You know, people crush their cars, they tumble and they, you know, and they end up somewhere in the ditch and they walk out and they're like, what just happened? Oh, my car's broken. They've got not a single bruise. It happens. Okay. Anyway, so having said all that, let's go back now to the second profundity, the third profundity. Having talked about the profundity of the ultimate, form is empty, the profundity of the conventional, emptiness is form. Now we need to understand how they're connected, that they're inseparable. And that is expressed by the words, form is not other than emptiness. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. However, although they're of one nature, this is a really weird way of talking, to be of one nature or to be one entity. What does that actually mean? That describes a relationship between phenomena, even not talking about emptiness and dependent arising. Even if we leave this aside, we can say that everything that has parts, so a whole has parts. Everything that exists is a whole because it exists, has parts. But the Tibetan word is not whole as such, it's part possessor. That's a weird word. Oh, it's a part possessor, that one. Right? That clock is a part possessor. Okay, it's a little awkward. For a person, it feels more comfortable. I'm just possessing all these parts. But having parts, I mean, that's another way of putting it. So that which has parts. So everything that exists has parts. It's a part possessor. So Tibetans, or in Buddhism at least, not just in Tibetan, but you need a noun for that. So a part possessor, or the one that has parts. So a whole. Anyway, everything that has parts, which means everything that exists, is of one nature with its parts. It's of one nature with its parts. So its parts and it are of one nature. Am I of one nature with this object? No. I can, I don't know, throw it away, break it, get rid of it, and still continue to exist the same way I exist now. Okay? It can affect me, of course, if I think about it, and I don't know, it's just it's just a top of a cup. But, you know, I can interact with other objects, but they're not part of me. They're not, in that sense, part of me. So they're not of one nature, which means my existence The way I exist right now is dependent on them. If they're missing, I mean, my arm, for instance, is of one nature with myself. Of course, I can cut off my arm, but then I'm a different person. I'm not a two-armed person any longer, right? The person who I am right now, every part of me is of one nature with me. Does that make sense? All right, so everything, my causes are not of one nature with me because one important aspect is missing. If something is of one nature with something else, they have to exist at the same time. They have to exist at the same time. They're what is called part and parcel, right? Inseparable, inseparably linked. The existence of one is dependent on the other. And so if one was gone, right, the other one would no longer be given. Therefore, in terms of all my parts, they're one nature with me, but that doesn't mean they're identical. They're not the same. We have to distinguish between the two. Again, that explains the relationship between phenomena. Phenomena that are not of one nature, that are of different nature. They can affect each other, but they're not part and parcel. And then phenomena that are of one nature. Okay? And then phenomena that are identical. So what is identical? This cup and this cup. This cup is identical with itself. Everything is identical to itself. Everything is identical. Everything is one with itself. Everything is one with itself. Everything is identical to itself. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So there are things, of course, that are identical. This cup. But the bottom of this cup is not identical to the cup. It's a part of it, but it's inseparable from it. It's of one nature with it. Okay, do you understand that relationship? So we study about this quite a bit when we learn about Buddhism, the relationship between phenomena, how do they connect to each other. It gives us a better sense of how they exist. Because of their interdependence, it doesn't mean that they all relate to each other in the same way. Just because they're interdependent doesn't mean their relationships are all the same. And to better understand them, that concept of being one nature, being of a different nature is introduced. But moreover, not only is it introduced to get a better sense of what exists and how it exists, but especially on the ultimate level, on the level of emptiness, that is really helpful. Because to understand emptiness, we need to understand that the object on which it's based and the emptiness itself are inseparable. If they weren't inseparable, if they existed separately, phenomena would be inherently existent after all, because their lack of inherent existence wouldn't be a part of them. Does that make sense? If the lack of inherent existence was not inseparably linked to them, they wouldn't lack inherent existence. It wouldn't be an attribute that is inseparably linked, and therefore the only other way, either something exists inherently or it doesn't. So we would end up with inherent existence. Right? Okay, so having said that, it's not that difficult. But now we may get the sense that they're exactly the same. Our mind is used to falling into extremes. So the sense, okay, we've heard emptiness is not, form is not other than emptiness. But emptiness is also not other than form. Now that last statement seems to be saying exactly the same thing, just the other way around. Here we need to interpret a little bit. Just as when we say emptiness is form, it doesn't literally mean that. And when we say emptiness is also no other than form, yeah, we can literally accept that. But what it actually means is something slightly different, which is not that obvious. It means that emptiness and, well, that form, in this case, form and its emptiness, although they're of one nature, they're nominally different. They're not identical. They're different. And they're different minds perceiving them, right? The different minds perceiving them. When you perceive form, you don't perceive the emptiness of form. When you perceive the emptiness of the form, you don't perceive the form. When you perceive your body, you don't perceive its emptiness. Our mind, at this point, being an unenlightened mind, cannot do both. It cannot do both. You can only alternate between the two. But there are two different minds, two valid minds, which is, again, why there's no contradiction. Right? There's no contradiction, because both minds are valid. The mind that perceives the body as existent, the body does exist. That's a valid mind. Okay? And the mind that perceives the body to lack inherent existence. It's also a valid mind. Now, a question that may arise in your minds is, the mind that perceives the body to exist, isn't that mistaken? Because the body appears to exist inherently? Yes, it's mistaken, but it's not totally wrong. That appearance is mistaken, right? I mean, even when you look in the mirror, it seems to be your own face. It seems to be your own face. It appears to be your face. And still you're not mistaken. Sorry, you're mistaken, but still you're not wrong. When there's like some, black spot on your nose, you're not going to try and scratch it away in the reflection, right? You're not trying to and even animals are said to know that. Like an elephant, I've heard there's this research with elephants that when you paint their trunks, right? If you paint them, that if they look in the mirror and they're familiar enough with this mirror image, they start cleaning it, right? They're aware this is just a mirror image. And I watched my mom's little kittens, like the first time they run around in our hallway, there's like a large mirror, and they came across the mirror, they went, this funny dance. So definitely not just mistaken, wrong also. But later on, I don't know whether they recognized themselves. I mean, they didn't give away where they were like, so what do I look like today? No, but they walked past it, looked in there and walked on. I don't think they thought there was another cat there. But somehow maybe they know it's them. Or I don't know what they know. But elephants, they're shown to know that when there's, like, as I said, something is on their maybe forehead or whatever, they start wiping it off. So they're actually aware that this appearance, it's like an optical illusion, so they're mistaken. Still, the mistaken appearance persists. You can't get away from that. It's just an optical illusion. There's so many optical illusions, but you can know that this is not true. And that's the first step to realizing emptiness anyway. First, yeah, you're mistaken. You're always mistaken. But you can't trust that appearance. And therefore, just besides that, but even without knowing that this appearance is wrong, we wouldn't say, or that this appearance is mistaken. That doesn't mean that the mind is wrong. Wrong means if you adhere to this mistaken appearance and believe it to be true. Now, we have plenty of those minds. We have those minds. When you start reflecting on, the self and the way it appears, then the misperception that actually actively holds onto inherent existence may arise. But with your sense consciousnesses, that never happens. Because inherent existence, in order for inherent existence to be actively apprehended, it has to become your main object. And the main object of a sense consciousness is always a sense object. Inherent existence is not a shape or color. It's not a sound. It's not a smell. It's not a taste. It's not a tangible object. However, the main object of a sense consciousness, always has to be a sense object. So inherent existence can appear, does appear, not just can, does appear to our sense consciousnesses, but the sense consciousnesses never actively apprehend them. So they can never be wrong from the point of view of apprehending emptiness, because that doesn't happen. Can they be wrong? Of course they can be wrong. They can be wrong. If you perceive the reflection of the face in the mirror to be an actual face, then they're wrong. Yeah? If you perceive, a cloud to be a flying cow, then it's wrong. But these are all sense objects, so there's no contradiction. Inherent existence is not a sense object. It merely appears. But that doesn't make it a sense object. Okay? Does that make sense? So our sense consciousnesses can still be valid. Our mental consciousnesses, unless they actively hold on to inherent existence, if they don't do that, if yes, the appearance is there, the appearance is always there, but without focusing on that, if we just focus on like a table or a cup and so forth, and they think about them, and I know mentally, oh, I left my cup in my room. I'm not focusing on its inherent existence, I'm just focusing on the cup. This is a valid mind that validifies or that proves the existence or establishes the existence of the cup. Right? It's a valid mind. If I go to check, the cup is actually there, and my mental consciousness knew that. Therefore, the mind that knows my cup supports conventional truth. I can't say conventional truth don't exist because there are minds that perceive in conventional truth. They know there's a cup. And the Buddha said, do not contradict the world. What did the Buddha mean with that? Don't contradict the world. He wasn't saying don't contradict the world when they think phenomena exist inherently. He didn't talk about that. He said about, in general, the objects around us. That when we don't think of philosophy, when we don't dig deeper on a daily basis, we say there are cups, there are tables, there are snakes, there are ropes, right? We name these objects, we say they exist, and they do exist. But as merely labeled phenomena. They do exist. It's important to distinguish between the two. So therefore, these two levels of reality, ultimate and conventional, it's not that one is more existent than the other. They're equally existent. They're equally existent, and they don't contradict each other. They don't contradict each other. That there is a cup doesn't contradict the fact that it doesn't exist inherently. In fact, the existence of the cup is only possible because it lacks inherent existence. Emptiness is the cup. Right? Does that make sense? So there is this fine line. Initially it seems like only one is possible if the other is not, and only one is possible and the other is not, and so forth. Right? But in actuality, both make perfect sense. Ultimate and conventional. Right? Okay. All right, that's the most difficult part of the Heart Sutra. If you get that, you get the essence, you get the heart of the Heart Sutra. What time is it now? So if now, I don't know, something happened and we can't continue, I feel at least you've got the essence, the most important part. But of course there's still more left, but this is most difficult to understand. And it's not enough to hear it once. It's not enough to think about it once, because it's easy to forget. And of course, all our experiences seem to suggest the opposite. At least the appearances seem to suggest the opposite. So if you want to really understand it, you need to keep with it. Learn more about it. Get a better sense of what emptiness means. I mean, you may wonder why in the monastic institutions, students, previously it was mainly monks, now it's also nuns, and also lay people, why they spend so much time on studying so many different topics. They're all directly or indirectly related to understanding emptiness. Of course, they're also intended to understand love and compassion and so forth. But again, love and compassion support emptiness. How do they support that? Right now, all my time and energy is spent with my sense of self. I mean, my ego. My ego, of course, the way I perceive it doesn't exist, but we talk like that. It's all about this imagined I, right? But if I start practicing love and compassion, I pay less attention to the self. I'm less concerned. There are these others. I may even forget about myself. And then if someone tells me the self doesn't exist inherently, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Because I'm not always thinking and obsessing about myself. So then negating, right, this extreme sense of I is so much easier. because I haven't been thinking of this extreme sense of I. And I'm not obsessing about a conventional I. You can't obsess about a conventional I. You can't. If you perceive the I, let's say hypothetically, now magically you wake up one day and you no longer perceive this exaggerated I. You perceive the conventional I. Trust me, even if you wanted to get angry, you couldn't get. You couldn't be attached. Only if you have an exaggerated sense, if you exaggerate its existence, only if you perceive it as truly, inherently, concretely there, then attachment can arise to it. Otherwise, impossible. So, that being impossible, the stronger our attachment to the I, how do you strengthen that attachment? Attachment to the I is actually basically another way of saying self-centeredness, right? Attachment to I and my happiness. So, if self-centeredness is really, really strong, then in your mind, your self-centeredness influences the other minds, and there seems to be a very solid I. It's very difficult to let go of that. But, as I said, if you focus on others, not the ones you're attached to that help you, no. Without any sense of attachment, whoever needs help, you're there for them. And you do that for long enough. And when I say you focus on others, it doesn't mean you're working all day long and you're so annoyed and, oh, I'm so exhausted. Because self-centeredness is still very much there. You're doing this work, but your focus is not totally on others. But if your focus is really just all the time on others, all the time, then that self-centeredness, there's just no time for it. And if there's no time for it, it's like one of my classmates, I remember we had a very high Lama in our class, and he once said, it's like the chair is empty here. You realize the chair here is empty. It's much easier because you're always focused on others mentally. It doesn't mean you doing all this stuff, but mentally focused on others, and you're still there, and you weren't obsessing about yourself. So that you realize the chair is empty, as he put it. I remember him saying that in the debate once. We debated this. Why love and compassion? Why love and compassion supported emptiness? And so I debated, he answered. And so I remember him saying, because you realize the chair here is empty. That was really beautiful. I never forgot that. It was years ago when he said that. Okay. All right. Good. Now, let's go back to the text. Is it time to take a break? No.
Can I ask about the...
Yes, let's take some questions. That's a good idea. Okay, please.
So when we're looking for the I and we cannot find it, then I end up with this mere I, right?
The mere I. Okay, the mere I. Okay, you end up with the mere I. What is the mere I? It's such a convenient way to describe the I. Not many words, just mere, right?
And then
I
feel like it. So I hear a lot that it's so subtle you cannot even, like Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say, and I think about it like as the thing that actually reincarnate, like the thing.
The thing.
Some kind of maybe an energy or a consciousness.
Oh, okay. This takes us to Beata's question. She had this question, I never answered it. She's still left with it. Ask you to debate it, to discuss it. But this takes us to also the mind versus the I, right. The mere I, right? Okay, very good. I'm glad you're bringing that up. That needs to be discussed. Ngatsam, datsam in Tibetan, right? Ngatsam, just I. What is the mere I or just I? What does that even mean? Who talks like that? The just I, the mere I. The just I could mean something else. The only I don't know. Mere I. What does that even mean?
Almost. Almost I.
No, not almost. It doesn't mean almost. No. You see, it's important to understand the terminology. Okay, anyone? Yes.
I remember it vaguely. The mere eye is the one that continues with us in our next birth.
Okay, you're saying what it does, but can you tell me what it is? So it's that which continues to the next life, but what is it exactly?
The very subtle mind.
The very subtle mind? No. Ram?
The I that which actually doesn't exist.
The I which doesn't exist.
Actually.
That actually doesn't exist.
Yes.
So the non-existent I.
Actually, it is not. Ultimately, it is not there, but it also appears to us as there is something existing. But if you
It appears as if something existing, but that's a wrong appearance, according to what you said, or the mistaken appearance.
It is merely an activity.
We are practicing activity. It's merely an activity. So it's not merely an I, it's merely an activity. We should say a mere activity. Mere I is actually not correct, is it? Mere activity would be much better.
But it is if we reify onto this mere I, we get Dalai Lama. Like he says that I'm a simple Lama. But it is.
If we reify that mere I, we get the Dalai Lama.
But if I reify from on a reified I, we get Trump. Because the ego is so high.
We get a humble person versus an arrogant. So if we reify the mere I, we get the right view.
But
if we reify
the reified I.
If we reify the mere I, we get someone like His Holiness. If we reify the reified I, we get someone like Trump. How do you reify the mere I? Aren't you in trouble when you reify?
Not reify, but we operate from the mere I.
Okay, that's different. We operate from the mere I. Very good. But what is the mere I? Okay, Christina, I think was fast.
It's the merely labeled I, so it's just...
The merely labeled I. Mike, would you want to?
Yeah, just because we have the essence of the Heart Sutra, we just learned that both truths depend on each other.
Yes.
If there is no inherently existent I,
then they can only be.
So there has to be an independent arising.
Right. They're very good. Mike puts it in a nice way. Sorry, there were some others who raised their hands. Well, let me first hear what everyone else says. Go ahead.
The label which mental faculty is giving it to itself to do its function without any projections or exhibitions.
Say that again slowly, please.
The label of mental faculty.
The what?
Label.
The label of mental faculties.
The label which mental faculty is giving it to itself.
Okay, yes.
To do its job
To do
without
its
any exhibition or
okay,
projections.
very good. Yes, very good. Yes, Beate?
So the I without any delusions and failure.
So the I...
The pure I, a pure I.
The pure I. Without illusions. The pure I. Okay, so the pure I. We've got the pure I. We've got the merely labeled I. Do you see the difference between the pure I without any afflictions? Can the merely labeled I have afflictions? Can the merely labeled I have affliction? Do you have a merely labeled I? Beate, do you have a merely labeled I? Do I have a merely labeled I? Yeah, you have too. Do you have afflictions?
Yes.
Yes. Does the merely labeled I have afflictions?
No.
So you don't have afflictions because you have a merely labeled I.
Oh, okay.
Right? Sorry, bad news. So we all have a merely labeled I. In fact, do we have any other I? Do we have any other I?
But it's like we're ended up with the same problem we started with the big I.
The big I. The big I.
We have the same problem.
Do we have two eyes, like a big and a merely labeled eye? A big and a small one, kind of?
No, but like, I feel it, as you said, I feel it's like an easy way out of trying to understand the existence.
I agree, because we don't understand.
Yeah.
We don't understand. This mere I thing,
It's not helping.
no, it's not helping unless you know what it refers to.
Yes.
Unless you know what you refer to. So Tibetans really like to shorten things, which makes sense if you debate and you want to get your argument across and you have like German words. Whoa, you're going to take a while to get just one sentence out. So Tibetans shorten things a lot, right? So they have a way in which you can always leave away some of the syllables and just take the first syllable that is enough to recognize the whole word. And grammatically, it's not incorrect. So they can do that. For instance, Pumba Dzimbe Migi Shepa. Pumba Dzimbe Migi Shepa. So an I consciousness that apprehends a pot, or apprehends a vase. Pumba Dzimbe Migi Shepa. In short, Bumze Mikshe. Bumba Dzimbe Migi Shepa, Bumze Mikshe. Bumze Mikshe. So you take from Bumba means vase, so you take the bum, just say bum. Instead of saying Dzimpe, which is grammatically correct, so you just say Dzin. Migi Shepa, you say Mikshe. You all shorten it. So you end up with Bumzin Mikshe. Instead of saying the merely existent I, yeah, you say Tatsam, Natsam. You leave away a lot. So it's just a way to easier convey, just not to take that long. You get so caught up in all these words that any kind of short sentence becomes really long because of all the terminology. And it makes sense to shorten it. But that takes some time, because the problem with that is, of course, that then you end up thinking, yeah, there's the merely labeled I, and then there's a mere I. As if it was some pure version. It's so short and so forth. It makes perfect sense. I know exactly where you're coming from. I'm not making fun of you. I just enjoy debating it. But no, the thing is, we need to get used to these short terms, in the sense that it really just means the merely labeled I. It is the I, the conventional I. The merely labeled I, the mere I are the same. But it's just easier to talk about the mere I.
Rebirth of
Pardon?
rebirth of the same person.
It's the same process.
Same person.
The same person.
Like we identify the reincarnation of.
So you're talking about reincarnation, like what is reincarnated?
Yeah.
About the mental consciousness versus the mere I? That is really important. This is also what I want to address in terms, it's also similar to what Beate asked, right? What is the difference between the I and the mind? Okay, now that's important. When we say the I is merely labeled, or the merely labeled I, or the mere I, right? The existent I, it is that which we label on the basis of mind and body, or mind or body. See, yesterday I said that in the meditation. So in general, when we say I, when we just think I versus others, the basis of imputation is usually mind and body. So I'm taking to mind and body, right? Okay, mind, body. And on the basis of that, I label I. In my case, I'm talking of myself having a mind and a body. So I label I. But there are other times, because I'm not just going I. I'm labeling I do this, I meditate, and so forth. So on the basis of, I'm waving, right? Right now I'm waving. I'm waving my hand. Actually, there's also a mental process of wanting to wave my hand, but even if I'm not aware of it, it doesn't matter, even if I'm not aware of it, just on the basis of this moving hand that I consider to be a part of me, I label I, and then I describe the action on the basis of these moments, these different moments, which, if you see them like picture frames, these different, I label, on the basis of all these different parts, I label move. So I, on the basis of the hand itself that I consider to be a part of myself, I label I. And on the basis of the movement on this object that I consider to be myself, I label move. So I end up with I move. Is there, besides that hand moving, and the thoughts, of course. Is there another I that somehow also waves while my hand is doing that? No. That would be a self-sufficient, substantial, permanent, inherent I, right? A findable I. Okay? That would be one of those. I mean, depending on how it appears to my mind, it would possibly appear permanent or self-sufficient or inherently, but that's impossible. That's just a figment of my imagination, that kind of self. That's just conjured up. That is just misperceived, wrongly perceived to be there by my own mind. So I'm just labeling on the basis of this hand moving. I label, I'm moving my hand. That I is valid because we agreed as a society, as living beings, that this I can call this I if the mind is close to this entity, right? So I label I. But other than that label, just the thought I, when I think I'm moving, there's no I to be found. That is the merely labeled I. Or when this I asked you before, doesn't it feel like there's a separate entity from the mind? Because when I say I'm watching my own mind, what is the basis of imputation when I say I'm watching my own mind? It's another mind that watches the mind as it looks at you, for instance. I pay attention, so there's two minds. There's one mind that is responsible for me talking to you. But at the same time, there's another mind that is watching my motivation as I'm talking to you. Am I motivated by attachment? Am I motivated by anger? Am I motivated by the wish to share the Dharma, and so forth? So when we talk about introspection and mindfulness, very important in every phase of our life, in every situation, it's important to check our own mind. What is my motivation? Am I controlled by afflictions or by a pure motivation, or as pure as it gets, by a positive motivation? So, having said all that, if then I say I'm watching my own mind, I'm applying introspection, this I, what is it labeled on? On my arm? On my hand? While I'm watching you, and I'm having this thought, I'm watching my mind. That I, is it labeled on my hand? It's no. It's labeled on the mind that observes another mind. On the basis of a mind, every now and then going, oh, what am I thinking? Okay, it's in the clear. Okay, what am I thinking? Okay. We're supposed to do that, right? Have that little spy, as they call it. But that seems to apply, there's really like a little eye kind of hovering around in the back and kind of looking what's going on, falling asleep every now and then and coming back. But that's just a way of talking. I mean, that's just the way we talk. In actuality, because I set my mind early on, I want to be mindful, that triggers every now and then a mind that watches the mind that is right now responsible for me talking to you. So it's kind of like another mind. I make it arise just because, you see, like when in the morning you want to get up at 5, for instance, and you forgot your alarm clock, and you just go 5 o'clock, and you wake up. It seems like a wonder, like something mystic, but it's nothing else but you setting your mind, and because of this motivation, your mind then acts in such a way that it wakes up. Similarly, if I set my mind before I sit down to class, to this session, and I try to think, okay, today I'll remember, I'll check again and again. Then automatically, while I'm talking, a mind will pop up, check, and then relax. I focus more on what I'm saying, and again, check, check, check. And every time that happens, if I then have the thought, oh, I'm checking, then that I is labeled on that checking mind. I label I on that mind that checks. So, in those two cases, the basis of imputation was different. Waving my hand, the basis of imputation was my hand. I was mainly taking that to mind when I labeled I. I notice, right? I notice. It's not like I'm doing this instinctively. It's not like a reflex. But anyway, so I may just do this without thinking much, or at least there should be the motivation to do so actually. But then when I have the conscious thought, I'm waving, well, the I, in that moment, labels the I on the basis of the hand. As opposed to previously, the I being labeled on the basis of the mind that is introspective. But in both cases, the I is merely labeled on either mind or body. And that's how we define the mere I. The I that is merely labeled on the basis of actually a valid basis of designation, which in my case is mind or body. It doesn't have to be both. I don't have to every time also take the body into consideration. In fact, not every time, not at all times when I still exist, I have a body. For instance, when I die, my body separates, my mind separates from my body. Do I still have a physical entity? Well, strictly speaking, if you take in the tantric explanation into consideration, where they talk about a very subtle energy that is connected to the cell, to the mind, then you could talk about some physical aspect. You wouldn't necessarily call that a body, but some physical entity. But even without that, leave away the tantric explanation. Just simple sutric description of death, which is the mental consciousness leaves the body. That's all they say. They don't even talk about the subtle mind. They just say the mental consciousness leaves the body. There's no sense consciousness anymore. You know, when we're dying, the sense consciousnesses are not there. They don't really explain what happens, but never mind, they're gone at the moment of death, which is not the moment when you stop breathing, but the moment when your mental consciousness leaves your body. Oh, we have to take a break, actually. Okay, let's leave it there and take a break. 15 minutes enough? 15 minutes, okay. 37. Ooh, 37, yeah. 15 minutes.